Okay, so a lot of people have asked me how exactly aquaponics works. So I thought I'd do this video just to let you all in on how my system's running. Water comes up to the fish tank and turns over about 1.5 times every hour, so that all the solids in the bottom of there from all the fish food come up through the outlet pipe, which has a T-piece at the top to stop it siphoning the entire tank, and flow rates out down through a set of pipe work. Same from this one, comes out through here and then heads out that way to the grow beds. Now, fish food goes in, the fish eat, the fish poo and wee, and that creates ammonia in the water. Now, the ammonia and the solids then go out this way through a set of filters. Now the first filter captures the bulk of the solids, which I've just cleaned out, and the brushes are in the bottom there to help collect some of the finer solids. And then as the clean water floats to the top, it comes in through this outlet which skims off the surface of the water into what's called a biomedia filter, which has an air stone running in the bottom there, kind of like your Enviroseptics, so that the little bacteria connected to the top of those little K1 pieces. I also have some actual bio balls in there, different size pieces, just to have great surface area for bacteria colonies to grow on. And those bacteria colonies, which are also in the gravel up there in the grow beds, all break down the ammonia through what's called the nitrification process, where ammonia is converted to nitrites from one set of bacteria, and then another set of bacteria break it from nitrites down to nitrates. Now, nitrates is what the actual plants use. And then clean water is converted back to fresh water, which then will go back through up into the fish tanks. And the water comes from the biomedia filter down into the sump where all my plumbing goes. That way I can run a pump in the bottom there, which will pump up through these set of lines, as you can see, and come up here and run along out to each of the grow beds. So all my gravel cannot remember for the life of me what it's called. They run on bell siphons so that they fill up, and then they actually drain themselves through a siphon process, kind of like your toilet flush system works. However, this is what they call constant flow in the floating raft, so that the water level is always full, and the roots are always sitting in the nutrient film. I do have an air stone in there, because without the air stone I found that the water would become stagnant and be a perfect place for bacteria to grow that I don't want in there, causing rot, root rot, plant rot, all sorts of wonderful diseases. The growth rate's going fairly well. The whiteflies have officially completely destroyed most of my apple cucumbers. I've ordered some actual pest control, which is a mite that I'm going to release in here, because my greenhouse is all enclosed, and the mites should help treat them, because I have sprayed with neem oil, I have treated, as you can see. The whiteflies and the honeysuckle they're leaving behind is now creating mould, and I think it's the mould that's actually destroying the cucumber, as much as the whitefly are into it. However, the Lebanese cucumber seems to have survived all right. Whether I am not spraying correctly enough, or I am not entirely sure. Now, this grow bed has just had a lot of plants removed. You can see the water's almost up to the level for the siphoning process to be. Now the water level has to sit at least an inch under the gravel. if the water level's allowed to rise up to the level of the top of the gravel, you'll end up with algae, and algae can take away from your nitrates, which normally feed your plants, and also increase ammonia, which is bad for your fish. You want to try and keep your ammonia levels at zero and your nitrate levels at zero through the nitrification process. And in here, there's a bell siphon. I've used a clear, and a earthworm escaping. We run red tigers and blue tigers in the system. That's the siphon breaking. Now there's a small, there's a reducer on the end of a standpipe so that it creates an overflow so the water will actually flow in. Now the cover goes over the top, so water will run up over the top of the reducer and in, and this will create a suction and a siphon so that all the water will drain into the sump. There's channels cut out at the bottom so it will suck from the bottom and pick up any solids or residue from the bottom of the gravel. Your gravel needs to be at least 20 mils. Some of this is a little bit small and doesn't allow it to withdraw all the solid waste efficiently as it should. The hydrogen does. It's actually working quite well. I don't tend to have a lot of solids build up. Everything seems to drain through it fairly easily, but the gravel was just a cheaper option. That's a $300 bed. This is a $30 bed. So it just depends what you're willing to put up with. Just make sure you test your gravel. Get a jar of vinegar, grab a handful, put it in. If you get air bubbles, that means there's calcium or limestone in there, which will affect your pH later on, and you really don't want to be chasing pH. There's enough other issues to chase without fighting that. Now, once the water runs into the sump, it's a little bit noisy in here, but the water will run into the sump. The pump down there will pump it back up to the grow beds, and I have a secondary pump that will pump up to the fish tanks. I used to run it on one pump, but my pumps don't pump enough to turn the fish tank over 1.5 times every hour and to pump out to all the grow beds now that the system's expanding. This other pump over here runs all the way out. You can't see because there's a trailer in the way, but all the way out to a solar heater, which helps to keep the water warm. All the time the water stays above 18 degrees, your bacterial process will work a lot more efficiently and your plants and fish will both enjoy it. Now over here is a secondary sump, which just works as an overflow because the one sump over there is not large enough if all the beds decide that they're going to siphon at once to catch all the water. So this one catches from this row of beds and that one catches from that row of beds. Now this one also feeds off to the NFT system I have over here, which is just running herbs. Now it just runs on a slower rate. You don't want the water to overflow and you don't want it to completely cover the roots. You want your roots to sit in the film but still be able to get oxygenated. I found that plants die off rather quickly if the roots can't get to oxygen. So if those water pipes are full, you'll end up with dead plants. Now this one tees off from this section of beds and runs up to this NFT system. You'll find some plants love it, some plants don't. At the moment the strawberries are thriving much better in this system than they are in the gravel beds. They did not enjoy the gravel at all. And the lettuce and your greens and herbs do much better, but the parsley has not been enjoying the heat. Under sufferance it's trying. So I've moved some over there, which are doing much better over there because they're shaded out a lot more of the day. So I'm thinking I'm possibly going to have to do something. I have 50% shade on that side with a 25% behind it, but this end of the greenhouse only has the 25% shade, and a lot of things are not enjoying the sun, and tomatoes are still getting burnt in the afternoon, but where they're stuck down to grow in the shade, they're growing much better. The gravel will get hot if it's left in the sun without shade. Same as in winter, it'll get very cold with a frost. So it is a bit of work changing over your greenhouse, just because we're in southern New South Wales, from shade to a plastic in the winter months so that the frost doesn't get it. But it does become quite a nice little hothouse in here. I could have left the plastic up all summer and then shaded over that, but I don't have a venting system where I can open vents when the temperature gets too much, and I do work 12-hour days, so there is not a lot of time left at the end of the day to come home and sort all this out. Another important thing when you're setting your plumbing up, excuse the mess under here, try to avoid this. Now I have a join running from the bed into a pipe that runs down into the sump itself. Often in this join, I end up with little bits of hydrogen clumping up in there. It's better to run a straight through pipe. Your hydrogen will flow through a lot of stuff. A lot of times it'll float for several months. They tell you it sinks, they lie. It does eventually sink, some of the stuff at the bottom, but when I fill this bed right up, the stuff at the top that's constantly aired will still float well above the surface. Another problem with aquaponics is because you're running an enclosed system, yes, you will get some bugs in here, but you don't get a lot of pollinators. A lot of it requires self-pollination, especially things like the cucumbers that have male and female flowers. Tomatoes, it's pretty easy to go along and give them a tap. A little bit of vibration will set it off. Your pumpkin flowers and the sugar melons, things like that, will need you to pollinate from one to the other. Eggplants seem to pollinate all right, and so do chilies. They pollinate fine. In the winter months when you put up the plastic, there's no breeze, so a fan's often required to circulate the air so that your plants can remove the carbon dioxide away from their leaves. I kept having troubles last winter that I thought was a deficiency, was a fungus, was something, and it turned out I didn't have enough airflow, so the plants were actually drowning. They couldn't get enough oxygen to their leaves because the carbon dioxide wasn't being moved away. And they also end up with very, very flimsy stalks and root bases, which don't do very well unless there's a breeze or something pushing against them, as there would be in nature. So you try and mimic it as much as possible. Duckweed grows like a weed. I do not oxygenate this pond. I do not change the water in this pond. I literally have a solar that runs down to a lead, and it runs a little pump in there which turns the water over so that the water is moving, but every second day this will split and double in size. I bought it in a tiny, well, it was about that big of an envelope for a couple of bucks online, and put it in the pond, and it's been going crazy ever since. Now I pull it out and dry it along the side in the sun, because that is 90% water. So if you feed it to your fish, yes, it will fill them up, but it won't give them the protein that they need unless it's actually dried out. When it's dried out, it becomes a 40% protein feed, whereas in that situation it's only 2 or 3% protein. It's mostly water based. So dry it out, make sure it's really dry before you give it to them, break it up and put it in as fish food, and makes a good substitute. Now, you do, as your fish grow bigger, you are required to change your filters out and clean your solids out from here, otherwise you will end up with nitrite spikes and ammonia spikes. Now I don't have tap water, I only use town water, which our town water sits at about a 7. But to stop the chlorine, I add in a teaspoon of ascorbic acid, which helps break down the chlorine to stop it from poisoning my plants and poisoning my fish during water changes, which usually only require me to take out the bottom of this filter barrel once a week. The brushes in there I pull out and clean, wash down. At the moment I've been pumping out to a channel that runs out that way to the beds, but I am hoping to get a hose fitting the next couple of weeks to run that out to all those wicking beds out there so that I can be filling them up with water. I've just been too lazy to hook it out with a watering can. So yep, that's my system, and hopefully this helps you. Please leave any questions, comments you may have. I'm happy to answer and happy to take on any advice you have. Okay, cheers.